Philip Morgan. I will be reading this rather than trying to remember it or to kind of wander off onto various other things. Well, the title that I've given to it is The Crowd as Animal. And I'm looking at the crowd from the point of view of an event organiser. And while I'm not convinced that few, if any, of the conclusions can be sociologically proven, they're all based on either mine or other people's experiences. And what I'm talking about is a standing group of people. Put them in seats and behaviour changes. People tend to remain as individuals to a far greater extent. Put them on their feet and they are easily subsumed into the crowd. The images are kind of just decorative, to be honest. They don't have any huge significance. Do you want to change it, Jonathan, to another one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a crowd. There comes a point in my experience during an event when a group of individuals becomes a crowd, and then that crowd ceases to be made up of discrete personalities but becomes one single organism. That point is when what happens to one individual in that crowd affects to a greater or lesser extent the entire group. If you think of the human body, if a small section of it is damaged, the entire organism can be disadvantaged. If your big toe has something heavy dropped on it, you can't walk. However, if there was a separated toe and it was crushed, it would have no effect except on that toe. If an individual falls over in a field, they may sprain something, but in all probability, falling on grass, nothing will happen. However, in a video of a pop concert, there is a clear record of one individual to the front left of the crowd falling. This person's fall creates a reaction in the people closest, and this reaction spreads through the crowd, the organism, until at the other side of the crowd, a number of people are crushed, severely injured, and one killed against a hoarding. A consequence of this incident was the change of design of stadium stages. In the planning of the movement of large groups of people, it is essential to ensure that there are no obstacles, however apparently minor. Again, if we think of ourselves, do you want to change the image again, John?
Yeah.
That's just another crowd. If we think of ourselves, if we move through a doorway and the latch is protruding so it hits our shoulder, we pause, perhaps stop. Obviously, all of us stops, not just the square inch of skin that hits the object. When there are sufficient number of people, when the crowd, the organism, is large enough to fill a space, this behaviour is replicated. A single litter bin sticking out from a wall will cause an animal crowd to slow, divert, and sometimes eventually stop. If the bin sticks out too much, it will just get swept away. When they had the first organised Hogmanay celebrations in Edinburgh, the centre became flooded with people to such an extent that the crowd became animal. If you think about walking down a city street when it's crowded, the street furniture is a nuisance. It gets in the way, it can slow you up. This is so, but even more so for the crowd animal. But the crowd animal is enormously strong. In Edinburgh that night, bus shelters, stop signs, fencing were worn away. The bus shelters ended up like abstract sculptures. This was not caused by the coordinated efforts of a few individuals, but the animal power of the crowd. One of the things that was so interesting about the damage that was caused, which was the equivalent of things being hit by double-decker buses, is that there was no record of any individual being hurt, nor in CCTV coverage is there any footage of individuals attacking the objects. It was the muscular power of the crowd as animal. Change again, John. In the science of fire engineering, which is about planning how you get people out of burning buildings, there is a computer program which is all about how the individual affects the movement of the crowd as animal. You take your audience and decide the percentage of halt and lane of those over 60, under 12, those blind, pregnant, disabled, sick. You then decide on the number that will be in that audience, and you give individual dots the characteristics of those slow and confused coaches. You then run a virtual simulation of an evacuation, and the effect can be dramatic, particularly in terms of speed and elements of the crowd as animal finding its way into nooks and crannies of the building that you would never have anticipated. The individual has far-reaching and unexpected effects on the farthest reaches of the animal. I suppose that the organism the crowd resembles most is a powerful, immense jellyfish that is very happy to move on land. So far I've just talked about the physical characteristics and immense strength of a crowd, but it also has an intelligence, and the event organiser that ignores this intelligence very rapidly runs into trouble. There is no doubt that the crowd animal has its own intelligence which supersedes that of the individual within it. No matter how much you may feel that at this point everyone should turn and leave Tottenham Court Road tube station, you have no choice but to go where the crowd goes, to follow what it has decided to do. The crowd as animal's intelligence works very slowly and is not subtle. We all know how long it takes for 6 people to decide which pub to go into, and that it normally ends up being one that no individual in that group would have chosen, but which has mysteriously become the object of desire of group mind. Crowd mind is bigger, slower, and irresistible, but it will only do things which make sense to it. If you want a crowd to behave in a particular way, you must make sure that the course of action makes sense to the crowd brain. I went to a pop gig, an Oasis gig. The way into the very large grass field was heavily fenced, and walking as individuals, there was a logic in that it was following the lie of the land and avoiding hedges and ditches, and there was a multiplicity of signage and stewards, and ahead could be seen the speaker stats. We all, as individuals and groups, happily followed the slightly sinuous route. On the way back, we were crowd as animal, and we could see ahead of us the buildings behind the car park. They were dead ahead. The pattern of the very large walkway did not make sense to crowd as animal, which knocked down the fencing, walked over the ditches and through the hedges, creating its own line of desire which went absolutely straight to the car park. The stewards were utterly powerless. The crowd had decided, and this is the thing that every event organiser is frightened of. The moment when the crowd decides to do something that is not in the plan, and which, while logical to the beast, is not logical to the individual who is actually falling down the ditches. It's interesting to read accounts of people caught in crowd panics. Next slide. It's interesting to read accounts of people caught in crowd panics where people have been crushed. Individuals almost always say that they were not themselves panicked. They were not desperate to get away, that they as individuals knew what was going on was wrong and irrational, but they participated wholeheartedly in the crowd brain's panic. Individual thought and decision is subsumed very easily by the group, however much we like to consider ourselves independent. In a series of experiments, volunteers were asked to sit in a room under the impression that they were sitting a written test. They had no idea that they were to test reaction time to a room filling with smoke and to see how increasing the numbers in the room affected the time. All anyone had to do was stand up, open the door, and find out what was going on. When there was only one person in the room, the reaction time was very rapid, but when the number increased, the reaction time became slower and slower, until when you had 20 people in the room, they would sit there until it was almost impossible to see through the smoke. Each individual had become subsumed into the group and was waiting for that cumbersome intelligence to come up with a decision. A tragic example of that situation was a plane that crashed and turned over, leaving the passengers upside down, safely buckled in, but the plane caught fire, and no person moved, and they all died. The group brain did not kick in, it did not make decisions. No one moved. In to get it to do what you want, instructions to the crowd animal brain must be simple, comprehensible, be given in good time, and make immediate sense. You can make use of the individuals contained in the crowd animal. You can give instructions by infection. If you have a number of stewards, and rather than giving instructions over the PA system, you get these stewards to say quietly to individuals in the crowd, please move slowly back, pass it on, they will pass it on. And the crowd animal, slowly, benignly, will shift, but only provided nothing else disturbs it and it makes sense. Change the slide. While its intelligence is cumbersome, its emotions are volatile in the extreme and change from second to second. I was working on an event quite a few years ago now in the Brighton Centre, which was sold out. There was a sold-out house waiting for Rod Stewart to appear. He was late. The audience was perfectly happy. But then from somewhere came the news, true as it happened, that Rod Stewart couldn't be bothered, was not going to appear, and had been seen having a drink in a local pub. The crowd was literally breaking the furniture within a minute. Demagogues know all about the power of the crowd animal, that they can tell it what to do, make it act on their behalf, but only if they give simple instructions and rouse its emotions with slogans. They also know that at all times they must treat it with respect, and that if they do not, it will tear them to pieces, and that no individual in that crowd will feel any sense of responsibility. The moral for the event organiser is to beware the crowd as animal and treat this tremendous, stupid, highly emotional and utterly amoral beast with great